Welcome to PetX Talks, pet experts empowering pet parents. Pet parents deserve expert knowledge and inspiration directly from pet experts. The topics will range from history to innovation, from health to safety, from training to philosophy, and from experiences to inspiration. The pet experts range from veterinarians to researchers, authors to historians, organizations to individuals, and anyone with important information and inspiration for the pet world. We all want to do the best we can for our pets and the pet world. PetX Talks, the experts who give them, and the topics they share will help us achieve that. Are you ready to be empowered? Then join us for a PetX Talk. This PetX Talk is brought to you by Pet World Media Group, your partner in all things pet media. Additional funding and considerations provided by Pet World Insider, Dogwise, and Life is Perfect.
Hello everyone, I'm Les Wilson from Cobalt Aquatics. I'm one of the founding members of the company. I've been in fish my entire life. I was born into a family that kept discus. I took over the tanks when I was about 6. I worked in fish stores all the way through college, have a degree in aquatic biology from UC Santa Barbara. I've been in R&D and the marketing side in aquatics my entire career, which is almost 20 years now. Today, we're going to be specifically talking about fish nutrition. And what I'm going to do is give you a primer on the basics of fish nutrition, what the fish need in their diet versus what we want them to have in the diet when we talk about differences between science and fish tank nutrition. Then we'll talk a little bit about what's some items that are not in them and briefly go into how we read a back of a label of a can of fish food and round it all out with how we make a fish food ultimately in the end. So that's what we're going to cover today, and we'll get right into it with fish nutrition basics. So like I mentioned, there's wants and needs when we talk about fish nutrition. When we talk about needs, that's when we look at, from a science or an R&D perspective, what do fish actually need in their diet? If we go out into the wild, catch a fish and do an analysis of what's in their gut. So what kind of fats, what kind of proteins, what kind of amino acids are in there? What do they really need? But that doesn't tell the whole story when we take a fish out of the wild or out of a farm and put it into that glass box that we call an aquarium that's their new home. And we want them to have a few other things in there. And when you look at a classic diet, there's needs, but here's little blurred lines of the wants and needs. So we'll get into those. So the first thing is the needs. When we talk about needs, we're talking about proteins. And specifically, we break it up into animal and plant proteins. And you wonder, why plant proteins for a fish? And it's an important, and we'll talk about that. The next thing we worry about is amino acids, and then lipids. And in this case, we call lipids in the science world, but it's fats. And we're talking about EFAs, HUFAs, and PUFAs, and we'll explain those later as well. And vitamins and minerals, and that's that needs list. And there's one big thing that's missing in that needs list, which is carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are not part of the fish's diet, but they're important in the way that we make fish food. They don't need them, but we need them to be able to make it. And when you look at a GA, a guaranteed analysis, that will break down, and you'll see there is like salmon meal and then wheat flour. And you're like, why wheat flour? Because that's not a part of the diet. Well, it's very important to us when we make the fish food because we need to basically create like a cookie. The analysis I always try to do, or the simile, is if you make a chocolate chip cookie batch and you just put in your proteins and your fat and your sugars, so your eggs and your butter and your chocolate chips, and you tried to cook it, what would happen? It'd be a big mess, right? Well, we add that flour as a binder, and then we're able to create that cookie. And when we're making fish food, that's basically the same thing. We have our fats and our fiber and our amino acids and our proteins, and we pull those all together. But if we just tried to cook them without that, we don't get anything. So we use that wheat flour as a binder. And when you look at that GA, you see the wheat flour high. You need to understand the protein and fat level versus the wheat content and make sure that the company isn't trying to use it as a filler. So from a wants standpoint, the wants we have are color enhancers, immunostimulants, probiotics, higher levels of vitamins, and a good protein mix. Again, these are things that we don't find in necessarily a wild type diet, but when we put them into the actual tank, we want them to have that so that they have peak color, peak immune stimulant, a peak immune system, and that they're in top shape all the time because they're in that captive environment. So back to more specifics on the needs. And here, again, we're talking about animal and plant protein. The big difference, and the reason we worry about animal and plant protein, is because they have a little different both attractant level and effect on the fish. So the positive about animal proteins, and this just is like if you're a carnivore like I am and you like steak, you smell that steak on the barbecue, you're going to go right to that barbecue, you're going to lift it up and you're going to look into it and go, ooh, what's cooking on that grill? Here, the animal proteins, so the tuna or salmon meal, something, or squid meal even, smells really good to the fish. When that fish food hits the water, the fish is going to swim right up to it and they're going to want to look at it. And that attractive nature of that, and then once they're there, the palatability. And in a lot of cases, people talk about palatability is when fish eat it or they just put it in their mouth, they don't swallow it. In our case in fish, it's very important that they actually ingest it. So we take palatability a little differently than some of the other diets that are out there, in, like say for dog or cat food, where it's just if it gets in the mouth. The animal proteins have a good amino acid profile and they're a good source of energy. The big negative though to animal proteins is that they have a very high nitrogenous waste versus the amount of protein that we get. And that's an important concept in aquariums because the fish are living where they poop. And nitrogenous waste in this case is the nitrogen-based waste, which is urea in the way we get rid of it, but in fish is ammonia. So everybody knows that ammonia is toxic to fish, and we have to be able to get rid of that and not put a lot of extra into it. So that nitrogenous waste component in animal proteins is very high compared to the protein. Now we talk about plant proteins. Plant proteins, the positive is that they produce a lot less nitrogenous waste for the amount of protein that we get. The negative is, and I always use Brussels sprouts or cauliflower because I personally hate them, the negative is they taste bad. So when I was little and I had to eat my Brussels sprouts, I'd chop it up and mix it in with the meat or the meatloaf, and then I'd be able to stomach it. And that's kind of what we do when we make fish food, is we blend the good plant proteins that have that low nitrogenous waste level versus good or bad taste with the good tasting, kind of not so good protein because of that extra nitrogenous waste steak. And we blend them together and we get a good profile that has everything that the fish needs. The next thing we worry about is amino acids. And amino acids in fish are another one of these critical things that are, because they're in the captive environment versus like a dog or a cat that's running around, they only can get them through ingesting food that we provide. The key here is that there are 23 amino acids that are found in fish in general. 13 of them they can make. So if we give them any acid or protein building blocks, they can synthesize 13 of those 23 in whatever concentrations they need. But there are 10 that you must actually provide. They don't have the enzymatic processes to create them. So out of the 23, 13 they can have, 10 we need to make sure they're in the diet, in the proteins, in the fats that we give them. Now, a little bit about fats. So again, we're talking about lipids, or EFAs, HUFAs, and PUFAs. EFA is an acronym for essential fatty acid. HUFA stands for highly unsaturated fatty acid. And then a PUFA is a polyunsaturated fatty acid. The difference between a HUFA and a PUFA is the number of different kinds of double covalent bonds in the actual protein chain. You don't really need to worry about that as a hobbyist, but you do need to understand the difference. Because the difference between a freshwater food and a saltwater diet is exactly that, the fatty acid complex. Because freshwater fish, in their evolution from the ocean up the streams and into the lakes and rivers, they have evolved the ability to take basically any fatty acid, whether it's a HUFA or a PUFA, and convert them into what they need. Saltwater fish, on the other hand, because they live in this great ocean environment with lots of different protein, lots of different fat sources, they've never developed the ability to synthesize HUFAs. So you have to supply them HUFAs and PUFAs, or you don't have a complete diet. And that's the big difference when somebody says a freshwater diet versus a saltwater diet, is that fatty acid complex. The next category that we worry about is vitamins. And vitamins, there are 15 types of vitamins that are specifically required in a fish's diet. And they're split up into two different groups. One's are water-soluble vitamins and the other is fat-soluble. Water-solubles are the B's and C groups. And they're what they say water-soluble is if we mix them up in a powder in water, they're going to go into solution and then they can be absorbed through the skin of the fish in this case. Fat-soluble vitamins mean that if you mix them up in water in that powder, they would not go into solution. But if you mix them up in an oil, they would. And those fat-soluble vitamins are the A, D, E, and K vitamins. The big difference here in the fat versus water-soluble, when you're talking about a prepared fish food, is to make sure that they're in good ratios. But when you're talking about something that you might be buying like a soak, like if you're taking your fish food and then you're adding it into one of these soaking things, if they're using fat-soluble vitamins and you're not really allowing that food to suck it up and really like a sponge and hold it, and the fish aren't eating it right away, those fat-soluble vitamins are going to immediately separate off of the food. They're going to go up into the top of the tank and float like an oil slick on top, and they're going to get pulled off your filtration system, and they're not going to be providing any nutritional value to your fish. So if you are using a soak on your diet and there are fat-soluble vitamins in that soak, make sure that you allow it plenty of time to really suck into the food that you're feeding, and that they're eaten very quickly once you put it in. Otherwise, you're just wasting your money. When you're talking about a prepared food, though, the vitamins should be in the right ratio, and the manufacturer like us know how to put them in so that they're correct and they will be ingested. The last category in the needs is the minerals. And the minerals in this case, we worry about macro and micro categories. The macro are the ones that are needed in big numbers. And there are some of the more obvious ones: calcium, potassium, phosphorus, sodium, and chloride. And so a lot of people will understand why you need calcium. A lot of people understand sodium and chloride with your nervous system. But phosphorus is one that a lot of people don't understand in the fish tank world, because they think phosphorus is actually a negative, because of, especially on the reef side where you create algae growth because we have excess phosphorus. Phosphorus is actually so important that it's the only specific ingredient or call out in the guaranteed analysis that is required by law to be put on there. It is so important because it is done in bone formation, osmoregulation, and then the big reason is the mitochondria. If you remember your high school biology, the little organelle inside the cell where we produce all of our energy, there's a reaction that takes adenosine triphosphate to adenosine diphosphate, so 3 phosphates to 2 phosphates. During that process, we create energy, and that's how we get all of our energy is from all of our cells. And we burn through those phosphates fairly quickly. So it's so important that, again, the government makes us put the phosphorus into the GA. So switching from the actual needs when we talk about that science diet and when we're looking in the wild to what we want them to have in addition to that in the aquarium, and we're talking about color enhancers. And in this case, we're talking about carotenoids or beta carotene. And in the fish tank world, the number one that we use is astaxanthin. And a lot of astaxanthin is derived from shrimp or crab shells. We also get it from flower petals and a couple other different sources. At Cobalt, we use a blended one because we feel that that gives us the best color pop. But the astaxanthin is a key ingredient to make sure that we get those reds, oranges, and yellows to really pop. There's also spirulina has some play in that as well. Beta carotene is the other one that people might know. Well, after color enhancers, we talk about immunostimulants. Immunostimulants are exactly what the word means. It's an ingredient that we put into the fish food that tricks the immune system into activating at a higher level. Think of this as like a bomb threat to TSA. If you're a traveler and you go in and you were at level orange and everything's great, TSA is just standing around and checking everybody. Somebody calls in a bomb threat. Now all of a sudden the military's at the airports with M16s. Everybody's on high alert. They're really checking all of the luggage. This is what an immune stimulant does. Normally, the immune system is just operating at a standard flat level. The immune stimulant gets added to it, and it's like a bomb threat. All of a sudden, all the white blood cells get up and they start flexing their muscle, and they're actively out hunting at a higher level. So it's an ingredient in there. There's not a pathogen really there, but it makes them on high alert so that if a pathogen does show up, they're ready and they're able to attack. Ingredients that do this are garlic. Actually, it's one of our great ingredients in all of our fish foods. Chitosan, which is another shrimp and crab shell derivative. And then the one that we really key on at Cobalt is beta-glucan. And that beta-glucan we get is from a mushroom derivative. But that beta-glucan has a great effect on those white blood cells to really get them going. The last thing that we do at Cobalt that's very specific to our brand, and some other people are starting to do as well now, but is probiotics. Probiotics have been legal in fish food and all of pet foods now for about 5 or 6 years. We as Cobalt are one of the first ones to really put it in all of our foods. And in this case, the probiotics are 2 species of Bacillus bacteria that we put into the food. So when the fish ingests it, they come out of their spore in the gut and start acting like almost like Activia yogurt for fish. They get into the gut, then after about 1 or 2 weeks, they get up into big numbers and they help break down the food inside the gut and into smaller nutrient particles that the fish can absorb. So the fish absorbs more nutrition, grows faster, and he's absorbing more, so he poops less. And then the bacteria actually live on the poop all the way out and break the solid waste down quicker in the aquarium. So in review, we have the needs, which are animal and plant proteins, amino acids, fats, and this is the big difference between a marine and a freshwater formula, is those HUFAs and PUFAs, vitamins and macro and micro, and water soluble and fat soluble, and then minerals in the macro and micro. Specifically, we worry about phosphorus in that case, and then the once. And again, it's a blurry line here because we want our fish to be in top shape and top color all the time. So those color enhancers, immunostimulants, and probiotics help keep them in top shape in the aquarium.
Hi, we're here with Les Wilson, who just gave an incredible fish nutrition talk. Les, I have to say, I think much of our audience is watching this going, I didn't realize there was that much that went into fish nutrition. Fish nutrition, though, is really very important to having a healthy tank.
Yes, fish nutrition, and when you listen to that talk, that was a kind of a primer so people understand what it is all about, what we do as a manufacturer. Now, do you need to know all that information as a hobbyist? No, not really. You just need to know that the company that you're buying from does know all that. That's the important part. Fish food is very important, the type of food you're feeding, because fish live where they poop. So when we're talking about what they feed, it goes in and out of their body and into their environment. When you feed a dog or a cat, they go into their litter box, they go out into the backyard, and they poop. And does it affect our lives? Yeah, because it smells, you might step in it, but doesn't affect the health of the animal necessarily. Where when we talk about fish food, if we're feeding them something like that is very low in protein and high in carbs, and it's going to flush through their system and cause a lot of poop, they're living in that aquarium with that poop. So takes nutrition for fish is at a different level, in my opinion, than a dog and cat. It's much more important.
Sure, it's health, but it's also the color. It is so many different things.
Yeah.
How can you tell if your nutrition is failing? I think you can tell if it's thriving, but how do you tell if it's failing?
That's an interesting question. How do you tell if it's failing? The big thing is whether the fish is growing at a good uniform rate, has good body form, and whether their color is there. That's probably the easiest way. The second way is when you're feeding, are the fish actually, when they're grabbing it, are they taking it in and then swallowing it completely, or are they taking it in and spitting it out and then like ultimately eating it, but really almost choking on it? They don't like the taste of it. So that's the other way to look at it, is how much they're actually ingesting. And then the last thing is the amount of waste that's being produced. If you're feeding, just like feeding a lower quality dog food versus a high quality dog food, the more they eat, are they pooping a lot, or are they ingesting more of that nutrition? And a cheaper fish food, they'll create a lot of waste, where a more premium like ours would create a lot less waste.
Now, one of the other things I heard you mention there was the amount that they're eating, how often they're eating. What is a good rule of thumb for people to follow?
What we say on all the fish labels is feed 2 to 3 times a day, the amount of food that will be consumed in several minutes. And a lot of people think that means, oh, we're trying to be jerk manufacturers and overfeed our fish, and that's not the case. It actually goes back to a study by, or a growth study that we use in R&D, and it goes back to a book called Standard Methods, where we feed 3% of the body weight of the fish a day. And it turns out if somebody takes a pinch of flake food on average and does it 2 to 3 times a day, that ends up being about 3%, and that's where that comes from. So if you really wanted to be very diligent about it and feed in a specific growth diet, you would weigh your fish, and then you could weigh your food out and feed 3% of the total weight a day. But several times a day, 2 to 3 times a day, with a pinch that they can eat in about 1 or 2 minutes is going to equal roughly that amount.
Well, I want to thank Les Wilson and all of you for joining us for this wonderful PetX Talk. Thank you for joining us for this PetX Talk. To learn more information about Les Wilson, visit cobaltaquatics.com. Funding for PetX Talks is provided by Pet World Media Group, your partner in all things pet media. Additional funding and considerations for PetX Talks is provided by Pet World Insider, taking you inside the world of pets. Visit petworldinsider.com for more radio interviews and expert articles and videos. Dogwise Publishing, all things dog. For all of your dog book needs, visit dogwise.com. Life is Perfect, a gift book. A whimsical collection of themed dog portraits accompanied by wit and wisdom by the Pawtographer. Visit thepawtographer.com. For more information and other excellent PetX Talks, visit petxtalks.com. This has been a Pet World Media Group production.